Every kingdom has legends, stories of heroic warriors, stories of powerful kings, stories of true love beneath the moon. This is not one of those stories. This is the story of Daisy Moonwiggle, a perfectly normal wolf who discovered two things on the same night. Her boyfriend was cheating on her, and the Alpha King was standing nearby watching the entire disaster unfold. Most people would cry. Some people would start a fight. Daisy did something much worse. She made a decision. A decision fueled by heartbreak, anger, and a truly impressive lack of long-term planning. She turned to the most powerful wolf in the kingdom and said the words that would start absolute chaos. Marry me. Not for love, not for politics, not even for power, just for revenge. The Alpha King agreed, which surprised everyone, especially him. What followed was 12 chapters of chaos, jealousy, public embarrassment, dramatic speeches, failed kidnapping schemes, marketplace arguments, and one extremely confused kingdom that slowly realized something unbelievable was happening. Because somewhere between petty revenge and royal drama, a fake marriage started becoming real. And unfortunately for one very regrettable ex-boyfriend, the woman he betrayed didn't just move on. She upgraded to a king. Before we begin today's episode of Terrible Decisions and Their Consequences, Werewolf Edition, I need you to do something very important. If you enjoy chaos, if you enjoy romance, if you enjoy watching people ruin their own lives in the most spectacular ways possible, then hit that subscribe button, because this story contains all three, and at least one public emotional disaster per chapter. All right, now let me introduce you to the two wolves responsible for 90% of the nonsense that will unfold. Their names were Howlbert Thunderfluff and Grizzle McSnarlface. Yes, those were their real names. No, they did not choose them. And yes, what they had spent their entire lives pretending the names were completely normal. Years before the chaos, Howlbert and Grizzle were inseparable young betas in the pack. Best friends. The kind of friends who trained together, fought together, hunted together, and occasionally got yelled at by the elders together. If you saw one of them, the other one was probably nearby doing something equally suspicious. They had grown up together, which meant they had spent most of their childhood competing over absolutely everything. They competed over who could run the fastest. They competed over who could climb trees quicker. They even once competed over who could stay awake the longest during a council meeting. That competition ended when both of them fell asleep at the exact same time and started snoring loud enough for the entire hall to hear. But their most serious competitions were what they proudly called important alpha training, which included who could howl the loudest without scaring the livestock, who could run the fastest across the forest without tripping over a root and embarrassing themselves, and most importantly, who could eat an entire roasted deer without throwing up halfway through. This last competition was legendary. It had rules, it had spectators, and it had one extremely concerned healer standing nearby, holding herbs and whispering, "This is a terrible idea." Grizzle won the first round. Howlbert won the second. The third round ended with both of them lying flat on their backs, staring at the sky, and silently agreeing that maybe eating an entire deer in under 10 minutes had been a poor life decision. But despite all the nonsense, Grizzle had one dream he talked about more than anything else: becoming Alpha King. What he talked about it constantly, with the confidence of a wolf who had already imagined his future crown, throne, and dramatic speeches. "I'm telling you," Grizzle said one afternoon while sharpening his claws on a tree trunk, "one day this entire pack will answer to me." Howlbert looked up from the roasted deer leg he was eating. "Congratulations in advance, Your Majesty." Grizzle smirked proudly. "More thank you. Please remember me when you need someone to test your royal food for poison." Grizzle rolled his eyes. "You'll be my beta." Howlbert slowly lowered the deer leg and stared at him. "You've already assigned me a job?" "Yes." Without asking me? Yes. Howlbert leaned back against the tree and delivered the sentence that would later become extremely ironic. Bold of you to assume I want a job? Grizzle snorted. Or you'll take the job. Why? Because you're loyal. Howlbert considered that carefully. Then he said calmly, I'm loyal, not unemployed. Several nearby wolves burst out laughing. Grizzle pointed at him. You laugh now. When I'm king, you'll be taking orders. Howlbert raised an eyebrow. If your orders involve roasted deer, I'm willing to negotiate. Grizzle shook his head. Or you're impossible. And yet you keep me around. Because you're useful. How? You make me look responsible. Howlbert nodded thoughtfully. That's fair. Everyone in the pack knew the truth, though. These two were a pair. A team. If one of them ever became Alpha King, the other would absolutely be his right hand. Grizzle had ambition. Howlbert had common sense. Together they balanced each other out. Which is exactly why fate decided to ruin everything. Because destiny, unfortunately, it has terrible comedic timing. The Alpha King died in battle. The news spread across the territory like wildfire. Suddenly the throne was empty. The pack had no heir, no successor. Which meant only one thing. The pack had to choose a new alpha. And neither Howlbert Thunderfluff nor Grizzle McSnarlface realized that their friendship was about to collapse faster than a cheap wooden chair. The pack had to choose a new alpha. And in this pack, choosing a new alpha was not done with voting, debates, or long political speeches. No, they used something far more terrifying. The Sacred Moon Lottery. Because apparently nothing says stable leadership like letting divine fate pick a ruler out of a bowl. By sunset, the entire pack had gathered in the central clearing. Torches burned in tall iron stands. Wolves stood shoulder to shoulder in a wide circle. The elders wore their ceremonial cloaks, which meant two things. The ceremony was extremely important, and nobody was allowed to make jokes, or which, unfortunately, was a rule that both Howlbert Thunderfluff and Grizzle McSnarlface were genetically incapable of following. Grizzle stood with his arms folded, staring at the ceremonial bowl where the names would be drawn. This is it, he said confidently. Howlbert looked at the bowl, then at the elders, then back at Grizzle. You look very calm for someone whose future might involve paperwork. Grizzle smirked. I was born for leadership. Howlbert nodded slowly. I was born for naps. Focus. I am focused. I'm focusing on how much work you're about to have. Grizzle ignored him. The elders stepped forward and began the ceremony. They prayed to the moon goddess. They blessed the ceremonial bowl. They whispered ancient words that sounded very serious and mysterious. A few wolves in the crowd wiped nervous sweat from their foreheads. Someone in the back whispered, "This is so intense." Another wolf whispered back, "I know. I haven't blinked in 3 minutes." Then the moment finally arrived. The head elder reached into the bowl. The entire clearing held its breath. Even Howlbert stopped talking. The elder pulled out a folded piece of parchment, unfolded it, and read the name aloud. Grizzle McSnarlface. For half a second, the clearing was silent. Then the entire pack exploded with cheers. Howls echoed across the forest. Wolves clapped each other on the shoulders. Someone shouted, "All hail the new alpha!" Grizzle stood there looking like a man who had just won the lottery, the throne, and free lifetime stake. Slowly he turned toward Howlbert. "How about that?" he said smugly. Howlbert raised both hands. "Your Majesty?" Grizzle grinned. "You're my beta." Howlbert sighed deeply. "I regret everything." But just as the celebration began to rise, one of the elders coughed. A quiet, uncomfortable cough. Another elder leaned closer and whispered something into his ear. A third elder frowned. The cheering slowly faded. Grizzle blinked. What? The elders began whispering among themselves. Their expressions grew more serious, more awkward. Then one of them cleared his throat and said the worst sentence in political history. About your father. The entire clearing froze. Grizzle's smile vanished, because everyone knew what that meant. Years ago, Grizzle's father had been caught selling pack secrets to rival wolves. For what price? 3 goats and 1 chicken. But to this day, nobody knew if the chicken had at least been well cooked. But the result had been the same. His father was branded a traitor, exiled, disgraced forever. Now the entire crowd stood there pretending they had never heard this information before. Which was impressive, because everyone absolutely had. Suddenly, the celebration became extremely awkward. Someone literally dropped their drink. A wolf in the back slowly whispered, "Oh no." The elders began arguing quietly, but one of them rubbed his temples like he had just developed a headache. Finally, the head elder sighed heavily. The lot must be redrawn. The crowd gasped. Grizzle blinked slowly. Excuse me? The council has decided, the elder continued carefully, that the position of Alpha King cannot fall upon the son of a traitor. Grizzle stared at him. Surely this was a joke. Surely someone would laugh. Nobody laughed. The elder reached back into the bowl. The crowd went silent again, and the second name was drawn. The parchment unfolded. The elder read the name aloud. Howlbert Thunderfluff. The clearing erupted again, but this time the cheers sounded confused. Howlbert blinked. Then he pointed at himself. Me? The elder nodded. Howlbert immediately raised both hands. Nope? The elder frowned. No? Nope. I return this. Please refund. You cannot refund the Moon Goddess. I'd like to speak to customer service. The Moon Goddess does not have customer service. That seems like a design flaw. The elders were not amused. Howlbert looked at Grizzle, then at the crown, then back at Grizzle. This is ridiculous, he said. You were chosen first. He stepped forward. Give it to him. The elders shook their heads. The second lot stands. Howlbert tried again. No, seriously. I insist. No. I'm very persuasive. No. How about a compromise? No. Howlbert sighed. He turned toward Grizzle. But Grizzle wasn't hearing any of that, because all he could hear was one thing. His best friend had been given the throne meant for him. If you were really my friend, Grizzle said bitterly, you'd step down. Howlbert looked at him quietly. And abandon the pack the goddess chose me to lead? Yes. The word hung in the air, heavy, unforgiving. Howlbert shook his head slowly. I can't do that. Grizzle let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. The elders placed the ceremonial crown into Howlbert's hands. And just like that, everything changed. Their friendship ended that day, officially, dramatically, and with enough tension to power a small village, 5 years later. And if you're wondering whether 5 years is enough time for 2 former best friends to forgive each other, the answer is absolutely not. If anything, the situation had aged like milk left in the sun. Welcome to the Grand Moon Festival, the most romantic night in the entire werewolf kingdom. Also the most dangerous night for anyone in a relationship. Because the Moon Festival was the sacred event where wolves publicly claimed their mates. In front of everyone, the elders, the pack, the gossiping aunties, the people who absolutely would not forget anything embarrassing that happened. It was a night of romance, a night of destiny, a night where true mates found each other beneath the full moon, and occasionally a night where someone ruined their entire life in front of several hundred witnesses. The festival grounds were glowing with lanterns and moonlight. Tables were filled with food. Music played. Wolves laughed, danced, and whispered about who might claim who. Someone had already started betting, because nothing says romantic tradition like gambling on people's love lives. Right in the middle of this magical, or dramatic, slightly chaotic atmosphere arrived a woman named Daisy Moonwiggle. Daisy was glowing, radiant, so happy that if happiness were a physical object, she would have been legally required to share it. Because tonight was the night. After 3 long years, her mate, well, technically not yet mate, but almost mate, Grizzle McSnarlface had promised he would finally mark her. 3 years. That's 36 months. That's over 1,000 days. Which is approximately 1,000 days of Daisy politely saying, "No marking or sex until we're officially mates." Grizzle had agreed. At least, verbally. Which meant Daisy had spent the entire day preparing for the moment. She had chosen the perfect dress. She had styled her hair. She had practiced her smile in the mirror. Not just any smile. The "my mate has just chosen me in front of the entire pack" smile. She had also practiced fainting gracefully, or just in case the moment became too romantic. You had to be prepared for these things. Nearby, several wolves whispered to each other. "That's Daisy Moonwiggle. She's the one Grizzle's been dating. 3 years, right? Yeah. Wow, that man took his time." Meanwhile, Daisy stood in the crowd, with her heart pounding happily in her chest. This was it. The night her life officially began. Across the festival grounds stood Grizzle McSnarlface. Taller now, stronger, and carrying the permanent expression of a man who had been annoyed for 5 straight years. The crowd slowly quieted as he stepped forward. Because when someone walked into the center of the festival clearing, it meant one thing. A claim was about to happen. People leaned closer. Conversations stopped. Someone whispered, "This is it." Daisy felt her heart skip. Grizzle stepped forward dramatically. The torches flickered. The moon shone brightly overhead. The entire crowd leaned in. For Daisy smiled. Grizzle reached out and grabbed Vanessa Fangarella, Daisy's stepsister. The silence lasted exactly 1 second. Then the entire crowd gasped so loudly someone actually choked on roasted chicken. Several wolves looked at Daisy, then at Vanessa, then back at Daisy again. Because surely this was a misunderstanding. Surely this was some kind of dramatic romantic twist. Surely. No. Grizzle was still holding Vanessa's hand. Vanessa, meanwhile, looked extremely pleased with herself, or which was a bad sign. Daisy blinked. Once. Twice. Her brain tried to process what her eyes were seeing. It was not successful. Grizzle looked around at the crowd, shrugged casually, and delivered what historians would later describe as the worst relationship speech in pack history. "Well, I already got the benefits elsewhere." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Somewhere in the crowd, a wolf whispered, "Did he just say that?" Another whispered back, "Oh, he absolutely did." Daisy stood perfectly still. Her smile slowly disappeared. Her heart quietly shattered into approximately 1 million pieces. And somewhere deep inside her mind, her soul packed its bags, boarded a carriage, and left the kingdom entirely. Because honestly, this situation was above its pay grade. The moon festival continued under the bright full moon. Hundreds of wolves watched. And Daisy Moonwiggle realized something terrible. But her love life had just become public entertainment. For a few long seconds after Grizzle's announcement, the entire festival froze. Music stopped. Conversations died. Even the wind seemed to pause like it was thinking, "Oh, this is about to get messy." Right in the middle of the clearing stood Daisy Moonwiggle, recently promoted from happy future mate to publicly humiliated woman in front of the entire pack. Her brain tried to process what had just happened. For step 1, Grizzle promised to mark her. Step 2, Grizzle grabbed her stepsister. Step 3, Grizzle confessed he had already been enjoying benefits elsewhere. Step 4, the entire population of the kingdom was watching. Daisy blinked slowly. Somewhere deep inside her chest, her heart quietly whispered, "We should probably burn something." Around her, wolves were already whispering like gossip journalists. Did he just dump her? In front of everyone? For her stepsister? Oh, this is going to be in the pack gossip for years. Meanwhile, Vanessa Fangarella stood beside Grizzle looking very satisfied with herself, like a woman who had just stolen someone else's dessert and was planning to eat it slowly. Daisy stared at them. Then she looked around. Hundreds of wolves stared back at her. Some looked shocked. Some looked sympathetic. And some looked like they had just bought front-row tickets to the most dramatic show of the year. One old wolf leaned toward his friend and whispered, "I knew I shouldn't have missed tonight." Daisy inhaled slowly. Her pride was wounded. Her heart was broken. And her patience had officially packed its bags and left the country. So she did what any reasonable, emotionally stable person would do in that situation. She decided to make an even worse decision. Her eyes scanned the crowd. But if Grizzle wanted to humiliate her in front of everyone, then fine. She would return the favor, and she would do it spectacularly. Her gaze moved past the cheering wolves, past the gossiping aunties, past the nobles pretending not to stare. Then her eyes landed on one particular figure standing calmly near the front of the crowd. Tall, composed, watching the entire disaster with the quiet expression of a man who had seen many foolish things in his life. Alpha King Howlbert Thunderfluff, but Grizzle's former best friend, current sworn enemy, and the one wolf guaranteed to ruin Grizzle's evening. Daisy's brain whispered, "Perfect." Before her common sense could intervene, Daisy raised her arm. Then she pointed directly at the Alpha King. Her voice rang clearly across the silent clearing. "I choose the Alpha King." The festival froze. Completely. Utterly. Even the torches seemed to flicker in confusion. A baby wolf dropped his snack. Someone in the crowd whispered, "She's insane." Another whispered back, "No, wait, let her cook." Every single pair of eyes slowly turned toward Howlbert Thunderfluff. The Alpha King blinked once, then slowly turned his head toward Grizzle McSnarlface. The tension between them was so thick you could have sliced it with a butter knife. 5 years of rivalry, 5 years of resentment, 5 years of unspoken anger, all standing right there under the full moon. Howlbert then turned his gaze toward Daisy. She stood there, proud, but furious, and clearly running entirely on spite. For a brief moment, the Alpha King said nothing, but inside his mind, several extremely entertaining thoughts appeared. Thought number 1, this is absolutely a terrible idea. Thought number 2, this will make Grizzle furious. Thought number 3, oh, this will make Grizzle very furious. Slowly, a smile spread across Howlbert's face. Not a polite smile, not a royal smile, but the kind of smile a man makes when fate hands him the pettiest revenge opportunity of his entire life. He stepped forward calmly. Then he spoke 4 words that would echo across the entire kingdom. "I accept." The reaction was immediate. Gasps exploded across the clearing. Several wolves nearly fell over. One noblewoman fainted dramatically, which honestly felt appropriate for the situation. And Grizzle McSnarlface looked like a man who had just swallowed a live porcupine. His eyes widened, or his jaw clenched. For a terrifying second, it looked like he might actually transform into his wolf form right there in the middle of the festival. Several guards immediately tensed. One of them whispered nervously, "Should we stop him?" Another guard replied, Let's see what happens first. Because if there was one thing everyone in that clearing knew, it was that tonight's Moon Festival had officially transformed into the greatest scandal the pack had seen in years. Life can change very quickly. For example, earlier that day, Daisy Moonwiggle had been a normal woman preparing to be claimed by her boyfriend of 3 years. She had spent the morning picking a dress. She had spent the afternoon practicing her romantic acceptance smile. She had spent the evening planning a happy future. And now? Now she was queen. Which was shocking. Mostly because Daisy herself had absolutely not planned this part. Within hours of the festival incident, the pack law had moved faster than gossip at a family dinner. Once a mate claim was accepted publicly, it became official immediately, which meant Daisy had been escorted out of the festival grounds by royal guards, placed into a carriage, and transported directly to the palace. She had not even finished her roasted chicken. This still upset her slightly. Now she stood inside the Alpha King's palace. A very large palace, a very fancy palace, a palace that clearly believed in excessive decoration. But Daisy looked around slowly. There were servants, there were guards, there were enormous chandeliers hanging from the ceiling that probably cost more than an entire village. And the dining table? Oh, the dining table. Daisy stared at the table setting. There were forks. Many forks. Too many forks. At least 7 forks. She leaned closer to inspect them. "Why are there so many?" she muttered. One of the servants politely replied, "Each fork serves a different purpose, or your majesty." Daisy stared at the servant, then back at the forks, then back at the servant. "Are we eating food or performing surgery?" Meanwhile, standing a few steps away, Alpha King Howlbert Thunderfluff watched this entire situation unfold with surprising calm. He had just accidentally married a woman out of pure revenge. And yet somehow he looked like the most relaxed person in the room, which was either confidence or extremely poor decision-making. Possibly both. Daisy turned toward him. So, she said. "So," he replied. There was a brief silence, the kind of silence that happens when two people realize they have just made a very large life decision without discussing it first. Howlbert cleared his throat. "We should probably address the obvious." "Yes," Daisy said. "You and I are now married." "Yes." "This was not planned." "No." "This was also not romantic." Daisy crossed her arms. "Speak for yourself." Howlbert blinked. "That was romantic for you?" "No," Daisy said flatly. "I chose you out of spite." Howlbert nodded thoughtfully. "Good." Daisy raised an eyebrow. "Good?" "Yes." He folded his arms. "Because I accepted you out of revenge." Daisy stared at him for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Excellent." "How romantic," Howlbert said dryly. "Very," Daisy replied. Another brief silence passed. Then, with the seriousness of two business partners negotiating a questionable deal, Daisy extended her hand. Howlbert looked at it, then shook it. Just like that. Two people shaking hands, like they had just signed a mildly illegal contract. "Congratulations," Howlbert said. "Thank you," Daisy replied. "Your ex-boyfriend looked like he might explode." "That was the goal. Impressive work." "Thank you." Across the room, several palace servants were pretending to polish furniture while secretly listening to the entire conversation. One servant leaned toward another and whispered, "Boss, did they just admit this marriage is revenge?" The other servant nodded slowly. "Absolutely." A third servant quietly pulled out a small notebook. "What are you writing?" "Betting odds." Within minutes, the palace staff had created a completely unofficial gambling pool. Current odds. They fall in love within 2 months. One guard whispered, "I give it 3 weeks." Another guard shook his head. "No way. That woman looks stubborn." A maid leaned in and said confidently, 6 weeks. Meanwhile, but in the center of the palace hall, Daisy and Howlbert had no idea they had just become the kingdom's newest romantic entertainment. And honestly, the staff was extremely excited to see how this disaster would unfold. If you had asked Grizzle McSnarlface how his evening was supposed to go, his answer would have been very simple. Step 1. Publicly claim his new mate. Step 2. Look powerful and impressive. Step 3. Enjoy the admiration of the pack. What actually happened was slightly different. Step 1. Publicly humiliate his girlfriend. Step 2. Watch her marry the Alpha King. Step 3. Accidentally insult the queen in front of the entire kingdom. Grizzle was not having a good week. In fact, Grizzle was not having a good 5 minutes, because reality had delivered a very unpleasant surprise. His former girlfriend was now Queen Daisy Moonwiggle, which meant that earlier that evening, what he had loudly declared, "I already got the benefits elsewhere," to royalty, in public, with witnesses. A lot of witnesses, the kind of witnesses who loved repeating gossip. Grizzle sat alone in his house, staring at the wall like a man who had just realized he had set his own life on fire. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. Across the room stood Vanessa Fangarella, and if Grizzle was upset, Vanessa was furious, because this was not how her evening was supposed to go either, but her plan had been simple. Step 1, steal Daisy's boyfriend. Step 2, become his mate. Step 3, eventually become Luna of the pack. Step 4, enjoy a life of luxury while looking smug at family gatherings. Instead, she had achieved the following. Step 1, steal Daisy's boyfriend. Step 2, watch Daisy marry the Alpha King. Step 3, realize she had accidentally helped create Queen Daisy Moonwiggle. Vanessa paced across the room. "This is your fault." Grizzle blinked. "My fault?" "Yes. You were the one who grabbed my hand at the festival. You encouraged me. You cheated on Daisy. You didn't stop me." Grizzle rubbed his temples. This argument was not helping. Meanwhile, across the kingdom, Alpha King Howlbert Thunderfluff was having a surprisingly pleasant time. Because if there was one thing he enjoyed, it was watching Grizzle suffer from the consequences of his own decisions. Inside the palace, life had adjusted very quickly. The Daisy Moonwiggle was now officially Queen Daisy, which meant she had been introduced to several new experiences. For example, servants bowing every time she entered a room, nobles calling her Your Majesty, and being escorted into council meetings where extremely serious wolves discussed extremely serious political matters. Daisy had spent the first meeting sitting beside the king and whispering quietly, "Do I have to understand any of this?" Howlbert had whispered back, "Not unless you plan to run the kingdom." "Good. Why?" "I stopped listening 10 minutes ago." Howlbert had almost laughed during a taxation discussion. Now, during another council gathering, Daisy sat comfortably beside him, while several nobles presented reports. Every time a noble finished speaking, they bowed respectfully. "To the Alpha King, and to Her Majesty." Daisy nodded politely. She was still adjusting to the fact that people were bowing to her. It felt extremely strange, like accidentally walking into the wrong room and discovering everyone had decided you were important. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, Grizzle McSnarlface was watching all of this happen, and it was slowly destroying his mental stability. He saw Daisy sitting beside the king during council meetings. He saw servants bowing to her. He heard nobles calling her Your Majesty. Every time someone said those words, Grizzle felt something inside his brain snap slightly. Your Majesty. Or the woman he had dated for 3 years. The woman he had humiliated at the festival. The woman who now lived in the palace. And every report that reached him made things worse. Apparently, the Alpha King was treating Daisy very well, suspiciously well. He escorted her through the palace. He personally introduced her to the nobles. He made sure she was comfortable during council sessions. One servant even reported that the king had personally asked the kitchen to prepare Daisy's favorite foods. Grizzle stared at the messenger delivering this information. "You're telling me he asked what she likes to eat?" "Yes." Grizzle blinked slowly. "He never asked that." The messenger wisely said nothing. Meanwhile, Vanessa crossed her arms. "So what are you going to do about it?" "Do about what?" "Your ex becoming the queen." Grizzle stood up abruptly. "I am not bothered." Vanessa stared at him. "But you've been pacing for an hour." "I pace when I think." "You shouted at a chair." "That chair was in my way." "You kicked the door." "The door deserved it." Vanessa sighed loudly. Grizzle walked to the window and stared out toward the distant forest. Somewhere out there was the palace. Somewhere in that palace was Daisy Moonwiggle, sitting beside his worst enemy, being called Queen. Grizzle clenched his fists. He was one inconvenience away from walking into the forest and screaming at a tree. And honestly, the tree probably didn't deserve that either. After several days of palace life, Alpha King Howlbert Thunderfluff made an important announcement to the royal council. "We will be traveling across the kingdom." The nobles nodded respectfully. "Ah yes, a royal tour. Excellent for strengthening alliances. Very good for public morale. Wonderful for political stability." Howlbert nodded seriously. Yes. This was, of course, completely for political reasons. Absolutely. Indefinitely. Not even slightly, because Grizzle McSnarlface lived in the kingdom and would inevitably hear about it. Not at all. Totally unrelated. 100% professional. Howlbert stood and continued. "The people deserve to meet their new queen." Daisy nearly choked on her tea. "My what?" "Your Majesty," one noble corrected politely. Daisy blinked. "Oh, right." The nobles all bowed. "Long live the Queen." Daisy leaned toward Howlbert and whispered, "Bort, are they going to keep doing that?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Forever." Daisy stared at him. "That feels excessive." The first stop of the royal tour was the marketplace in the Central District. By the time the royal carriage arrived, a massive crowd had gathered. Citizens stood on rooftops. Merchants abandoned their stalls. Children climbed fences. Everyone wanted to see the new queen. When Daisy stepped out of the carriage beside Howlbert, the crowd erupted. Cheers filled the streets. And Daisy froze. "Oh no." "What?" Howlbert asked. "They're looking at me." "Yes." "Why are they looking at me?" "You're the queen." "That still feels like a paperwork error." Howlbert chuckled. "Just smile and wave." Daisy awkwardly waved. The crowd loved it. "She waved!" "She waved at us." "I think she waved at me." "I'm pretty sure she waved at everyone." Howlbert gently took Daisy's hand. The crowd went quiet for a second. Then the Alpha King did something extremely dramatic. He lifted Daisy's hand and kissed it slowly. Gasps echoed across the square. "Oh! Did you see that? The king kissed her hand." "How romantic." Daisy's face turned red. "Howlbert," she whispered. "What?" "You're making a scene." "I'm being respectful to my queen." "You are being very respectful." He grinned. "Public relations." Daisy narrowed her eyes. Suspicious public relations. As they walked through the marketplace, Howlbert continued his performance. "Careful. I'm my queen." "Allow me to guide you, my queen." "Are you comfortable, my queen?" At one point, Daisy whispered, "You have said my queen 17 times. I like the phrase. You're enjoying this too much." "Maybe." Meanwhile, the citizens were absolutely losing their minds. They adored Daisy, mostly because Daisy behaved nothing like the nobles they were used to. When a child tripped in front of the crowd, Daisy immediately rushed over. "Are you okay?" The kid nodded. "Well, you're the queen." "I'm still figuring that part out." The child smiled. "You're nicer than the last nobles who came here." Daisy whispered to Howlbert. "That sounds concerning." He nodded. "It is." Soon whispers spread through the crowd. "She's kind. She helped that kid. She talks like a normal person. She waved again." Someone in the back suddenly shouted, "Queen Daisy!" Another voice joined in. "Queen Daisy!" Then another. "Queen Daisy!" Within seconds, the entire crowd was chanting, "Queen Daisy! Queen Daisy! Queen Daisy!" Daisy looked around in shock. Oh no, Howlbert tried very hard not to laugh. "Oh yes," the crowd grew louder. "Queen Daisy! Queen Daisy! Queen Daisy!" Daisy leaned closer to him. "I think they like me. They love you. This feels illegal. You're the queen. It's allowed." Unfortunately for one particular wolf in the kingdom, someone had also decided to report this event to Grizzle McSnarlface. The messenger nervously stood in Grizzle's house. Thus, and then the entire crowd started chanting. Grizzle's eye twitched. Chanting. Yes. What were they chanting? The messenger hesitated. Grizzle leaned forward. What were they chanting? The messenger sighed. Queen Daisy. Grizzle went completely still. The messenger continued nervously. The Alpha King also kissed her hand. Silence. And he called her my queen several times. Grizzle slowly leaned back in his chair. His brain was attempting to process this information, and it was not succeeding. "So let me understand this," he said slowly. "My ex-girlfriend." "Yes." "Is traveling around the kingdom?" "Yes." "While people chant her name?" "Yes." "And the Alpha King is publicly kissing her hand?" "Yes." Grizzle stood up, then sat down, then stood up again. Vanessa watched him carefully. "Or you're turning red." "I am calm. You're breathing very fast. That is normal breathing. You look like you might faint." "I will not faint." At that exact moment, the messenger added one final detail. The citizens called her the most beloved queen in recent memory. Grizzle's soul attempted to exit his body. He grabbed the nearest table to steady himself. This cannot be happening." Vanessa crossed her arms. "You should have thought of that before cheating on her." Grizzle slowly turned towards the window. Somewhere out there, Daisy Moonwiggle was smiling while people chanted her name. He clenched his fists. If one more person said the words, "Queen Daisy," he was going to run into the forest and scream at the moon. And honestly, the moon also did not deserve that kind of negativity. After witnessing the horrifying spectacle known as the Royal Revenge Tour, Grizzle McSnarlface came to a very important conclusion. This situation required a plan. A brilliant plan. A heroic plan. A plan so impressive that Daisy would immediately realize she had made a terrible mistake marrying the Alpha King. Grizzle stood dramatically in the center of his living room. Vanessa sat nearby eating berries and watching him with the same expression one might use when observing a raccoon attempting mathematics. "I have devised a strategy," Grizzle announced. Vanessa sighed. "Boy, that sentence never ends well." Grizzle raised a finger. "Step 1. Hire rogues." Vanessa blinked. "Why?" "Step 2. Those rogues will kidnap Daisy." Vanessa choked on a berry. "You want to kidnap the queen?" "Not permanently," Grizzle said quickly. "Just temporarily." "Ah, yes," Vanessa said. "That makes it much less illegal." Grizzle ignored her. "Step 3. I heroically rescue her." Vanessa stared. "From the kidnapping? That you arranged?" "Yes." "And then?" "Step 4, Grizzle said proudly. "She falls in love with me again." Vanessa slowly leaned back in her chair. That is the dumbest plan I have heard in my entire life. Grizzle scoffed. You lack vision. No, Vanessa replied. I possess common sense. Unfortunately for everyone involved, Grizzle had already hired the rogues. The rogues in question were not exactly legendary criminals. They were more like enthusiastic amateurs. 3 scruffy wolves stood in front of Grizzle in a dim tavern. Their leader nodded confidently. We can handle the job. Grizzle lowered his voice dramatically. You will capture the queen during tomorrow's market visit. Got it. Then take her to the old mill outside the city. Understood. I will arrive shortly afterward and rescue her. The rogue grinned. Hero stuff. Exactly. Vanessa whispered to Grizzle, This will end badly. Grizzle waved dismissively. To trust the plan. The next day, the rogues waited in the marketplace. They scanned the crowd carefully. The queen would be easy to recognize, important-looking, surrounded by attendants, probably wearing expensive clothing. Eventually, they spotted a noblewoman walking through the market. She wore elegant robes. Servants followed behind her. The rogues nodded. That must be her. They leapt into action. Within seconds, the noblewoman had been grabbed, wrapped in a cloak, and carried away in dramatic fashion. Unfortunately, the noblewoman was not Daisy. She was Lady Penelope Growlshire. And Lady Penelope Growlshire had an extremely loud voice. Unhand me, you uncultured potatoes! The guards heard her screaming almost immediately. Within minutes, the kidnappers were surrounded. One rogue attempted to run. Another tried hiding behind a fruit cart. The third simply gave up and sat down. The guards arrested everyone, including the very confused Lady Penelope, who was extremely offended. Do you have any idea who I am? Yes, my lady, said a guard nervously. Then why was I just kidnapped in the vegetable section? That is an excellent question. Soon the rogues began explaining. Very badly. Eventually, one of them blurted out the truth. Grizzle hired us. The guards sighed. Of course he did. Later that afternoon, the entire ridiculous story reached the palace. Daisy was sitting comfortably in the royal dining hall eating pastries, important queen business. Halbert, she said between bites, did you hear something about a kidnapping? Halbert looked up from a stack of documents. Yes. What happened? He rubbed his temples. Grizzle attempted to kidnap you. Daisy froze mid-chew. What? He hired rogues. What? They were supposed to capture you. What? Halbert continued calmly. Unfortunately, they kidnapped Lady Penelope Growlshire instead. Daisy slowly lowered her pastry. Or they kidnapped the wrong person? Yes. They got arrested? Yes. Lady Penelope screamed at everyone? For about 20 minutes. Daisy stared at him. Then she asked the most reasonable question possible. Halbert, was that supposed to impress me? For a moment, the throne room was completely silent. Then Howlbert burst into laughter. Not polite laughter. Not quiet chuckling. Full, uncontrollable howling laughter. He leaned back in his throne, nearly falling sideways. I cannot believe... He wiped tears from his eyes. He hired kidnappers. Daisy shook her head. That man dated me for 3 years. Howlbert laughed even harder. He kidnapped the wrong noblewoman. I feel slightly insulted. How did he think that would work? How did he think any of that would work? Howlbert leaned forward, still laughing. I almost feel bad for him. Daisy raised an eyebrow. You do? Howlbert considered this. No. Daisy took another bite of her pastry. For good. Across the kingdom, Grizzle McSnarlface received the news of his plan's failure. The rogues had been arrested. Lady Penelope was demanding financial compensation, and the entire city was laughing about the incident. Grizzle slowly lowered the letter. Vanessa watched him carefully. Let me guess. He stared blankly ahead. They kidnapped the wrong person. Vanessa sighed. I knew it. Grizzle stood up and walked towards the door. Where are you going? Vanessa asked. He paused. Or to scream into the forest. Vanessa nodded. That seems appropriate. Life in the palace slowly settled into a routine. A strange routine. A very unexpected routine. Because originally, the marriage between Alpha King Howlbert Thunderfluff and Queen Daisy Moonwiggle had been built on a very simple foundation. Spite. Pure, glorious, dramatic revenge spite. But over the following weeks, something odd began happening. Daisy and Howlbert started spending more time together. At first it was for official reasons. Council meetings, royal dinners, public appearances, important royal things involving long speeches and very uncomfortable chairs. But eventually, the official events ended. And sometimes the two of them simply stayed. Talking. Late at night. Usually with tea. Sometimes with pastries. Because Daisy firmly believed that every important political discussion should involve baked goods. One evening they sat on the palace balcony overlooking the forest, and the moon hung high in the sky. The kingdom was quiet. Daisy leaned on the railing, sipping tea. So, she said casually, how often do people try to overthrow you? Howlbert blinked. That is a strange question. I'm curious. Once or twice a year? Daisy nodded thoughtfully. Seems stressful. You get used to it. She looked at him. You say that like someone who owns several emergency plans. Howlbert hesitated. I have 17. Daisy nearly dropped her cup, laughing. Oh, 17? One must be prepared. You're not a king. What am I then? You're a very organized disaster manager. Howlbert chuckled. Over time, conversations like this became common. They talked about politics, about pack traditions, about the strange habits of the royal council. One night Daisy whispered during a meeting, Why does Lord Barkington nod so aggressively? Howlbert glanced across the table. And he does that when he doesn't understand something. He has been nodding for 10 minutes. Yes. Another time, Daisy leaned over and whispered, Is Lady Thornwhisper asleep? No. She hasn't blinked. That's normal. Your counsel is terrifying. But the conversations didn't stay political. Sometimes they talked about childhood memories, embarrassing moments, pack stories, ridiculous gossip. Daisy told stories about growing up with her family. How her younger cousin once tried to become an alpha of the backyard. The backyard contained exactly 2 chickens and a confused goat. Howlbert laughed so hard he had to hold the table. You come from chaos. Yes. And now you live in the palace. Also chaos. Fair. Slowly, Howlbert began noticing things about Daisy. Things he hadn't expected. She was funny. Not polite, noble funny. Actually funny. The kind of funny that made him laugh when he wasn't expecting it. She was kind. She remembered servants' names. She thanked guards. She once personally delivered food to a kitchen worker who had injured his leg. And she was honest. Dangerously honest. Which led to one very memorable conversation. They were walking through the palace gardens when Daisy suddenly said, You know something? How ominous. You're less scary than people say. Howlbert raised an eyebrow. Oh? She nodded thoughtfully. Much less. And what exactly am I then? Daisy studied him for a moment. You're mostly dramatic. Howlbert stopped walking. Dramatic? Yes. I am the Alpha King. You dramatically enter rooms. That is presence. You dramatically give speeches. That is leadership. You dramatically stare at people. That is intimidation. Daisy shrugged. Still dramatic? Howlbert stared at her for a long moment. Then he started laughing. So you're the first person who has ever said that to me. Really? Yes. Wow. What? Everyone else must be extremely polite. They are terrified. That explains a lot. Another evening, during one of their balcony talks, Daisy leaned back in her chair and sighed contentedly. You know, she said, this revenge marriage thing worked out surprisingly well. Howlbert nearly choked on his tea. Excuse me? I mean, the palace is nice. You're evaluating my kingdom like an inn. The food is excellent. That is the royal chef. The balcony view is amazing. That is the entire kingdom. And you're decent company. Howlbert blinked. Decent? Don't get cocky. He laughed again. But something strange happened afterward. Something he had not expected. Howlbert began to realize something. Something dangerous. He actually enjoyed Daisy's company. A lot. He liked their conversations. He liked the way she laughed. He liked that she treated him like a normal person instead of a terrifying ruler. Most wolves either feared him or flattered him. Daisy did neither. She simply talked to him, teased him, argued with him, called him dramatic. And somehow, he liked that. Very much. Which led to a deeply inconvenient realization. One night, after Daisy had gone to bed, Howlbert sat alone in the throne room staring at the ceiling. This is a problem, he muttered, or because somewhere along the way, his revenge wife had become someone he genuinely liked. And that was not part of the plan. Not even slightly. Not even in plan number 17. And Howlbert Thunderfluff had a very uncomfortable feeling that this situation was about to become much more complicated. The kingdom had recently discovered something extremely entertaining. Royal drama. And nothing entertained a kingdom quite like romantic chaos involving the queen, a disgraced ex-boyfriend, and a very dramatic alpha king. Naturally, the situation escalated quickly. It began when Grizzle McSnarlface, in what historians would later describe as a deeply questionable decision, publicly declared that he still loved Daisy. Very publicly. In the town square. While standing on a barrel. Because apparently important announcements require barrels. I still love Daisy Moonwiggle, Grizzle shouted. Several citizens paused mid-shopping. A baker whispered to another merchant, "Oh, is that the guy who hired kidnappers last week?" Yes. Ah. Grizzle raised his arms dramatically. I will win her back. Someone in the crowd asked, Didn't she marry the king? Yes. And you insulted her in public? Yes. And then you accidentally kidnapped the wrong noblewoman? That was a misunderstanding. The crowd nodded thoughtfully. This is going to end badly, someone said. Across the marketplace, Daisy was quietly buying pastries. Again, and because pastry-based diplomacy had become a lifestyle. She turned slowly toward the commotion. Is that Grizzle? The baker nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. He's standing on a barrel. Yes. Why is he on a barrel? Confidence, I assume. Daisy sighed. I should have moved farther away. Unfortunately, Grizzle was not the only source of chaos. Vanessa Fangarella had also reached her emotional breaking point. Because while Grizzle was loudly declaring his love for Daisy, he was technically still Vanessa's boyfriend, which meant Vanessa had several questions. Very loud questions. Very public questions. And Vanessa chose to ask those questions in the middle of the marketplace. Daisy Moonwiggle! Daisy looked up. Oh no! Vanessa marched across the square like a storm cloud, wearing expensive boots. You stole my man! The crowd instantly went silent. This was better than theater. Daisy blinked. What? You stole him! Daisy stared at her. Then she looked over at Grizzle. Then back at Vanessa. Then she shrugged. You're welcome to keep him. The crowd burst into laughter. Vanessa looked like someone had just slapped her with a fish. You can't just give him back. I'm not taking him. You married the king. That happened. Vanessa pointed dramatically. He still loves you. Daisy sighed. That sounds like a personal problem. Behind her, the baker whispered to a customer. Or the queen is savage. Yes, the customer whispered back. I like her. Within hours, the entire kingdom was talking about the incident. Merchants repeated the conversation word for word. Servants shared the story across the palace. Even the royal guards were whispering about it. One guard said, Did you hear what the queen told Vanessa? Yes. You're welcome to keep him. Legendary. Inside the palace, but Daisy sat comfortably in the throne room eating another pastry while recounting the event. Howlbert, she said casually, Vanessa yelled at me in the marketplace. Howlbert looked up from his documents. That sounds unpleasant. She accused me of stealing Grizzle. How did you respond? Daisy took a bite of pastry. I told her she could keep him. Howlbert froze. You said that? Yes. He slowly leaned back in his throne. When that may be the most terrifying thing anyone has ever said in that marketplace. Daisy shrugged. I was being polite. You rejected him in 3 words. I'm efficient. Howlbert chuckled. But the amusement faded faster than he expected. Because another detail from the story bothered him. Apparently, Grizzle had tried speaking to Daisy earlier that morning. Nothing serious, just a brief conversation. But when Howlbert heard that, something strange happened. His mood darkened, and he did not understand why. Later that evening, as he walked through the palace halls, he kept replaying the thought. Grizzle talking to Daisy. Grizzle standing close to Daisy. Grizzle saying he loved Daisy. Howlbert stopped walking. Why does that bother me? He crossed his arms. This made no sense. Kings were supposed to feel power, confidence, authority, control, not... Whatever this feeling was, it felt uncomfortable, annoying, irritating, suspiciously similar to... No, he muttered, or that was impossible. Alpha Kings did not feel jealous. That was a problem for poets and teenagers. Yet the thought still lingered. Grizzle, talking. To Daisy. Howlbert frowned. This is ridiculous. He marched toward the balcony, trying to clear his mind. Meanwhile, across the palace, Daisy was sitting with a servant discussing the day's events. So the entire marketplace saw Vanessa scream at you? The servant asked. Yes. And Grizzle declared his love? Yes. And you told Vanessa to keep him? Yes. The servant shook her head in admiration. Your Majesty, the kingdom loves this drama. Daisy sighed. I feel like I accidentally joined a very loud play. And somewhere in the palace halls, the Alpha King of the entire kingdom was discovering something extremely inconvenient. He was jealous. Very jealous. And he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. By this point, the kingdom had reached what scholars would later call peak drama. The queen, the ex-boyfriend, the jealous girlfriend, the extremely confused Alpha King, and a population of citizens who were now treating the situation like the most exciting entertainment the kingdom had seen in years. Naturally, things finally exploded. It happened one afternoon in the palace gardens. Daisy had escaped there for a moment of quiet. Or the palace gardens were one of the few places where people weren't constantly bowing, whispering, or shouting, "Queen Daisy," from rooftops. She was sitting peacefully near the fountain when a familiar voice appeared behind her. Daisy. She sighed without turning around. Of course. Grizzle McSnarlface stepped forward. He looked nervous, which was new. Grizzle was usually confident, loud, and aggressively wrong about most things. But today he looked desperate. Can we talk? He asked. Daisy stared at the fountain water. We're already talking. Grizzle hesitated. I mean seriously. She turned slowly. This should be interesting. He walked closer. Daisy, I made a mistake. Daisy blinked once. A mistake? Yes. You cheated on me. I know. You humiliated me in front of the entire pack. I was confused. You declared another wolf your mate at a festival. It was complicated. You literally grabbed her hand in front of everyone. I panicked. Daisy crossed her arms. Or that was a very dramatic panic. Grizzle ran a hand through his hair. Look, I know I messed up. Messed up? Yes. You destroyed our relationship. Yes. And now you're here because... Grizzle took a deep breath. Because I still love you. Daisy stared at him. The garden went quiet. Leave the king, Grizzle continued quickly. Come back to me. I promise everything will be different. I'll treat you better. I'll make it right. I swear. For a long moment, Daisy said nothing, and then something in her expression changed. The calm politeness she usually wore simply vanished. You don't love me, she said flatly. Grizzle blinked. Yes, I do. No. Yes. You love the idea of me. That's not true. You ignored me for months. I was busy. You flirted with Vanessa constantly. That didn't mean anything. You embarrassed me. I said I was sorry. And now suddenly you want me back. Yes. Daisy's eyes narrowed. Or you only want me back because I'm queen. Grizzle opened his mouth, then paused, then closed it again. Because, unfortunately, that statement had a little too much truth in it. The silence stretched awkwardly. Daisy raised an eyebrow. Exactly. Grizzle tried again. That's not the only reason. Oh? I mean, yes, you're queen, but that sentence is already terrible. I'm explaining badly. You usually do. Grizzle groaned. Daisy, please. And we were together for 3 years. Yes. That has to mean something. It did. Then give me another chance. Daisy looked at him for a long moment. Then she sighed. You had your chance. Grizzle's shoulders sagged. You really won't leave the king? Daisy shook her head. No. Why? She shrugged. Because he actually respects me. Grizzle flinched. And he doesn't treat me like background decoration. Another flinch. And he never once tried to replace me with Vanessa. Grizzle rubbed his face. This is going very badly. Yes, Daisy said calmly. It is. Behind a nearby stone archway, someone had accidentally overheard the entire conversation, Alpha King Howlbert Thunderfluff. He had originally come to the garden for fresh air. Instead, he had walked directly into an emotional battlefield. And now he stood very still, listening. Every word Daisy said echoed in his mind. He actually respects me, but he doesn't treat me like decoration. He never replaced me. Howlbert slowly exhaled, because something had just become very clear. At the beginning of all this, he had married Daisy purely for revenge, a brilliant, petty, satisfying revenge. But now, listening to her stand up for herself, listening to her reject Grizzle completely, listening to her defend the life she had built here, Howlbert realized something shocking. He didn't want revenge anymore. That part had already succeeded. Grizzle was miserable. The kingdom adored Daisy. The entire situation had become a legendary humiliation. The revenge was complete. But now there was a new, much more complicated problem. Howlbert leaned against the stone wall, staring up at the sky. Because the truth had finally caught up with him. He didn't want Daisy as part of a revenge plan. He didn't want her as a symbol. He didn't want her just as his queen. He wanted her. Which was extremely inconvenient. Was because falling in love with your revenge wife was not part of any responsible royal strategy. Not even in Plan Number 17. The full moon ceremony was the most important gathering in the kingdom. Every wolf in the pack attended. Warriors, nobles, merchants, farmers. And of course, the royal family. The massive clearing outside the capital was packed with wolves standing beneath the bright silver moon. Torches lit the space in a warm glow, while whispers moved through the crowd like wind through leaves. Everyone knew something unusual was happening tonight. The Alpha King had called a special assembly, and whenever Alpha King Howlbert Thunderfluff called a special assembly, something dramatic usually followed. Daisy stood beside him at the front of the gathering. She leaned slightly toward him. Why does everyone look nervous?" "Because I called a meeting under the full moon," Howlbert said calmly. "That explains nothing." "It usually means a major announcement," Daisy blinked. "You didn't warn me about this." "I enjoy surprises." "I do not enjoy surprises." Across the clearing, Grizzle McSnarlface stood with his arms crossed. He had heard rumors about tonight's announcement, rumors that made him very hopeful, very confident, very smug. Next to him, Vanessa Fangarella whispered, What do you think the king is announcing?" Grizzle smirked. "Probably the end of that ridiculous marriage." Vanessa's eyes lit up. "You think he's divorcing her?" "He said the marriage wasn't real." Vanessa nodded eagerly. "Yes, it was revenge." Grizzle crossed his arms proudly. "Which means Daisy will finally realize she belongs with me." Several nearby wolves quietly moved farther away. Or they had learned that standing too close to Grizzle during his speeches often resulted in second-hand embarrassment. At the front of the clearing, Howlbert stepped forward. The crowd instantly fell silent. The Alpha King's voice carried across the entire gathering. "There is something I must say tonight." Thousands of wolves watched him. Even the forest seemed quiet. Howlbert glanced briefly at Daisy, then back at the crowd. "This marriage," he began, "it was never supposed to be real." A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. Daisy's eyes widened slightly. Grizzle immediately straightened. His smirk returned. "I knew it," he whispered. Vanessa clapped excitedly. "Yes." But Howlbert wasn't finished. He continued speaking. "But somewhere along the way," he paused, "it became the best mistake of my life." The clearing went completely silent. Grizzle's smirk slowly disappeared. Vanessa blinked. "Wait." Howlbert turned toward Daisy, but his voice softened slightly. "If you'll allow it," he stepped closer. "I want to mark you as my true mate." For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire kingdom looked like a statue. Then chaos exploded. Gasps, cheers, shocked whispers. Grizzle's face went completely pale. "No." Vanessa grabbed his arm. "No." Grizzle stared at the scene in horror. The Alpha King, choosing Daisy, not for revenge, not for politics, but for real. Vanessa looked like her brain had just tripped over itself. "You said he was divorcing her." Grizzle looked like someone had kicked his soul. "I was wrong." Vanessa clutched her head. "I bought celebration wine." Meanwhile, at the center of the clearing, Daisy stared at Howlbert. "You're serious?" "Completely. You realize this is extremely dramatic." "I've been told that before." "By me." "Several times?" Daisy laughed softly. "But you're proposing in front of the entire kingdom." "Yes." "You couldn't do this privately?" "How would the kingdom enjoy the drama?" Daisy shook her head. "You are impossible." He smiled. "But you're still here." She studied him for a moment. Then something in her expression softened. Because the truth was simple. He had stood beside her when she was humiliated. He had treated her like she mattered. He had made her laugh. And somewhere along the way, he had become important to her too. Or Daisy took a small step closer. "Well," she said casually, "this whole thing started as revenge." "Yes." "And now you're asking me to be your true mate." "Yes." "That's a very big upgrade." "I try." Behind them, Vanessa suddenly fainted dramatically. She collapsed into a nearby wolf's arms. "I cannot survive this betrayal," she whispered weakly. Grizzle didn't even notice. He was too busy staring at the king and queen, like the universe had personally betrayed him. Back in the clearing, Daisy looked up at Howlbert. "You know something?" "What?" "This all started because I was angry." Howlbert grinned. "Best angry decision you ever made." Daisy laughed, then she nodded. And under the full moon, in front of the entire kingdom, the revenge marriage became something real. And somewhere in the crowd, a merchant whispered to his friend, "This is the greatest drama our kingdom has ever seen." His friend nodded, on 10 out of 10. Would attend again. Life in the kingdom eventually returned to normal. Well, a new version of normal. Because once a revenge marriage turns into a royal love story witnessed by the entire pack, things don't simply go back to quiet. For starters, Queen Daisy Moonwiggle became the most popular queen the kingdom had seen in decades. Citizens adored her, mostly because she still behaved exactly the same as before she wore a crown. She still wandered through the marketplace. She still talked to merchants. She still ate an unreasonable amount of pastries. One baker even created a dessert called the Queen's Revenge Tart. Daisy approved immediately. Meanwhile, Alpha King Howlbert Thunderfluff discovered that ruling a kingdom while being happily mated had one unexpected side effect. He smiled more, which confused the royal council greatly. During one meeting, Lord Barkington whispered to another noble, "What is the king happy? That seems suspicious. Should we be concerned?" But Howlbert was perfectly content. He still ruled with strength. He still terrified enemies. He still made dramatic entrances into rooms. But now, sometimes during council meetings, Daisy would lean over and whisper something ridiculous, and the Alpha King of the entire kingdom would start laughing. The nobles had no idea how to process this. As for Grizzle McSnarlface, life had become extremely uncomfortable. And everywhere he went, people whispered, "Oh, look, it's the guy who lost the queen. Isn't he the one who hired kidnappers? He tried to rescue the wrong noblewoman. He stood on a barrel once." Grizzle had stopped walking through the marketplace entirely, mostly because the baker once offered him a pastry called the Regret Roll, and the entire shop laughed. Vanessa, meanwhile, had moved on. Sort of. She told everyone she had moved on. Completely moved on. Absolutely over it. However, she still occasionally shouted things like, "I could have been Luna," usually at random trees. The trees handled it well. Back at the palace, one quiet evening, Daisy stood on the balcony beside Howlbert. The moon shone over the kingdom. The forests stretched into the distance. It was peaceful. Daisy leaned on the railing. "You know something?" "What?" Howlbert asked. "If Grizzle hadn't cheated?" "Yes." "I would have never met you." Howlbert smiled. "That's true." She looked at him. "So technically, he caused this entire situation." "Yes." Daisy nodded thoughtfully. "We should almost thank him." Howlbert laughed. "Almost." Daisy smiled. "Still the best revenge I've ever had." Howlbert wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Best revenge we've ever had." Below them, the kingdom slept peacefully, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf was probably still yelling at a tree. But that, of course, was someone else's problem. And dear listeners, that's how a revenge marriage accidentally turned into a love story. Daisy Moonwiggle only wanted to make her cheating ex regret his life choices. Instead, she became queen. Grizzle tried to win her back. He failed spectacularly, repeatedly, publicly. Vanessa chased drama like it was a competitive sport. The kingdom brought popcorn. And Alpha King Howlbert Thunderfluff? He started a fake marriage out of pure pettiness. then accidentally fell in love with the one woman in the kingdom who treats him like a slightly dramatic wolf instead of a terrifying king. Moral of the story: never cheat on a good woman. She might upgrade to a king. Thanks for listening to this chaotic tale of revenge, romance, and very questionable life decisions. And remember, sometimes the best love stories start with, "I'll marry you just to annoy my ex."